leadership, I thought Ed Miliband was wrong to resign so quickly. I think he did his best in the campaign. I didn't agree with the stance on austerity. I didn't agree with the stance on immigration at all. But I think he presented himself as well as he possibly could. And we also allowed it to become a fact, this idea that somewhere or other he stabbed his brother in the back, as though David Miliband had some entitlement to lead the party and Ed didn't. There was an election, he was elected, the other wasn't. End of story. There was an election, he was elected. And I think to resign so quickly was a mistake. I'd have much rather he'd said he was going to resign, said, look, I'll resign in July or whatever. So to give time to have that policy debate. And the Parliamentary Labour Party has had 2 meetings to discuss the policy debate. But by the second meeting, it had already become a sort of leadership hustings almost. And I think the leadership contest is actually a distraction from the policy debate. And so we're ending up having to debate policies through the cipher of an individual who's a leadership candidate. And as you know, the rules on electing the leader of the party have changed. It is now an individual ballot of party members, union members who pay the political levy and registered supporters. So MPs no longer have this massively exaggerated vote, where each individual MP used to have the vote equivalent of a constituency Labour Party, or even more than that, massive. That's gone, but not the lock on who the nominees are for leader. You have to have the support of 34 members of Parliament, and we've had one meeting. We've discussed this. There are some very good new MPs that have been elected. I mean, Kate Osamore, I'm thinking of Clive Lewis, thinking of Cat Smith, I'm thinking of a whole lot of really good people that have been elected. It's a pleasure to see them there and a pleasure to work with them. We're meeting again on Wednesday afternoon, straight after the Queen's speech, to discuss how we approach the leadership election. If we can find anywhere near 34 votes, then we'll put somebody up. That's what I want to do. I want to be a candidate. Even if that candidate realistically is not going to get elected, it will change the terms of the debate. Because there'll be somebody there who's saying, actually, the party is wrong on austerity, is wrong on immigration, and has to be proud of council housing, etc., etc. All the things that I'm sure we can all be agreed on. So we are meeting again on Wednesday afternoon to have that discussion. On the points that Joy made, I did do a short article today in the Morning Star on Shaka Aamer, as well as a much longer debate about the issues of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And as for the new MPs on Trident, that goes far wider than just the left. The CND poll that we did of all Labour candidates, and I'm Vice Chair of CND, so I was privy to the contents of this poll, showed that more than half of all Labour candidates were opposed to Trident replacement. Now, obviously, that's candidates rather than people that were elected, but there seems to be a much greater head of steam. So when the Trident vote comes, as it ought to, in 2016, we'll then have some significant blocks of MPs voting against the Trident renewal. It doesn't mean we're going to win it, but it does mean that we'll have a significant block. And my strategy, which I'm going to put to the CND group as soon as it's refounded, is that we push for a foreign policy review ahead of a strategic defence review, and that we participate very, very fully in the strategic defence review on the whole nonsense of nuclear weapons and how we could be spending £100 billion much more wisely on lots of other things. On the anti-austerity stuff, really great. I mean, the Brighton train, the Brighton bell is reborn. Ring the bell. To get people up to London for that, that's fantastic. So put that news out as wide as you can, because that will encourage others to do the same. Because we need it to be really big. Surely the best antidote to the disappointment of May the 7th is to make June the 20th absolutely huge. We have to have an alternative economic policy. We are moving into the territory of saying that we are the softer version of neoliberalism, and therefore, somehow or other, the only way out of alleged debt is to make austerity the norm. Austerity is hitting the poorest the hardest, It's hitting the weakest even harder. It's hitting the most vulnerable desperately hard. That is what austerity does. And surely we can put forward something rather better than that. And if we can't, then what's the point of us existing at all? We've got to be able to do that. And that's why we need to intervene as strongly as possible on an anti-austerity message. And also be proud of public services and proud of them. I just say quickly one other thing. In the Labour Party, we tend to not talk about socialism and what kind of society we want to live. We tend to conflate everything into what the state will do for people and what we will do if we had some degree of control over what the state does. That's not wrong. It's not wrong to talk about spending money on council housing, not spending money on defence, all of that, obviously. But it ends up this sort of bargaining with the electorate. We say, well, we will do X if you vote for us for Y. We need to be there a bit more about the kind of values and kind of society we want. What we mean by democracy, what we mean by democratic participation, what we mean by making those demands, and the kind of society we want people to live in, and be proud of that. And that means a party that's much more active in the community all the time, promoting those kind of ideas and those kind of values, and asking the questions about sustainability, asking the questions about the way people live, asking the questions about why cooperatives are not being made stronger rather than being allowed to be weakened at the present time, all those kind of issues. And so if you look at the founding of the Labour Party, it was as much debate about social relationships and interrelationships as it was about how the state spent its money. So I think there's issues there that we need to confront as a party. Some of them are going to be a bit uncomfortable, but we've got to do it. Over to you.
I wanted to address Mick's point about improving productivity as well, because it's something that the focus becomes very much on profit rather than how we're going to invest in a new manufacturing base or industry. And no one seems to be having that discussion anywhere. And I do wonder whether there was a little bit buried somewhere in the interesting policy book we were given that we were going to invest in low carbon technologies, and actually something that would be very appealing here locally, I think, to people. And it wasn't expanded upon. There was no development of that idea, and there's been no acknowledgement of the fact that our manufacturing base is pretty much wiped out under Thatcher, and it's never been replaced. And what we should be doing to try and make sure that rather than simply handing over all our public services to various companies in Europe to make a profit out of, why we can't bring something back into the UK. And I'm obviously in favour of bringing a lot of those back into the state sector and renationalising them, but there isn't anything to stop us actually bringing some things back into Europe anyway, whatever, whichever public services they are. We haven't had any discussion about that. We haven't looked at what we can do either in terms of new industries or existing industries to bring those back into the UK and the jobs that go alongside them. And that's something that I'd love to hear any of the leadership contenders talking about. It's not just about business and profit, it's that's over there, we're over here, but actually bringing those arguments together. I think secondly, I've got a massive worry that the Labour Party leadership is not recognising the North-South divide. They kind of touch upon the North-South divide. I don't think from the people that swept in and swept out during the election campaign and jumped out of cars for a photo and then jumped back in again, gained any understanding of what it's like to live in Brighton or what it's like to live in the South East. And the fact that we've got these tiny dots now on the South Coast should be acting as a bit of a warning bell here that policies are not appealing to a vast swathe of voters. And I'm just going to, and correct me if I've got this wrong, but we've now got Andy Burnham, Liz Kendall, Yvette Keeper and Mary Craig left in the leadership election, or they can be added to still, can't they?
Well, the process hasn't even opened yet, actually. So
we've got no one from either London or the South East, that is, which is another good reason. There you go, Jeremy. But there's no one who's either coming and talking to us or bringing with them an understanding of what it's like to live in the South and South East, and what has turned into, sort of in this area, commuter towns. We've got our own digital industry, our own creative industries that are quite strong around here, but no one's talking about those. And I do worry that if we don't have any contender that represents this part of the world, because we've got no MPs left here apart from Peter, sort of south of London and Norwich, that how are they going to get a representative voice? How are they going to know what we're about? That's just sort of a passing thought, whether we're just entrenching that, constantly entrenching that, with the way that we operate. Another, I don't think this is addressing anyone's points actually, but another point I wanted to make. Personally, I feel there's a total lack of transparency about how Labour Party policy is made. The policies appear and they disappear. I've got no idea where they come from or how they got to them. And if somebody wants to throw some light on that after the years I've been in the Labour Party, I just find it all a bit smoke and mirrors still. I'd like us to do something about that.
It's with the tablet.
Pardon?
It's with the tablet.
Yes. And the last point is a really local one, and it's an appeal really, and to the people that have been to the People's Assembly meetings and other community group meetings, and that is, if we are going to build, if we are genuinely going to try and build some kind of progressive alliance locally that can be grown, it does require some difficult conversations and for people to compromise or come to a consensus, whichever is the more comfortable term. But it's not an easy thing to do. And just from my own personal experience, I'm always happy to put myself out there and stand on platforms, and I can deal with the heckling and all the rest of it. However, we marched from Hove Town Hall down to the level, when was it? June, July, last year. And I had been invited to speak on that platform by the GMB, and then when I got, I had a big flatbed truck there, some of you heard this story from, I got to the back of the flatbed truck with my speech in my hand, already prepared, and it was a bit nerve-wracking, you know, looking up and seeing 3,000 people stood there and wondering if what I had to say was going to be good enough. That was nerve-wracking in itself, but those nerves were completely wiped out by somebody from the Trade Union Socialist Coalition telling me that I wasn't going to be allowed to get on the platform. Because my name was not on his list. Well, I don't really care about his list. I don't do lists when it comes to this. I was there with my speech and I'd been invited to speak. And they would not let me physically go up the ladder. Now, I'm only 5'4.5". I wasn't big enough to push this guy out the way. But it took 6'4" Paul Maloney from the GMB Regional Secretary, to pull me up to the side of the level and to drop me onto the ladder. And I had to stand there and say, right, I'm here with my speech now, so are you going to let me speak? You might as well. And he went, oh, okay then. But you know, I should not have to fight like that to get to have a Labour voice on a platform when I had been invited by one of our leading trade unions. And I'll do that again if required, as long as I have someone big enough to lift me on the top. But you know, if we are genuinely going to build a progressive alliance, it has to be accepted that we want a Labour voice and that we're a broad church and some of us are on the left and have got something to say and have got the guts to get up there and say it and not to be stopped. So it needs to apply to the other side as well. It's not just about Labour reaching out, it's also about the myriad of smaller political parties allowing them to be a Labour voice. Because I tell you what, I was not going to march all that way and have 3,000 people stood there thinking that it didn't matter to the Labour Party that they had done that march, that their pay was being frozen or cut or whatever. And that's what they would have walked away with. That's the impression they would have had, was that why weren't Labour there? And there are people in the city from other political parties who take great pleasure in pointing out when Labour are not there. We've got to be more visible. But you know, someone said to me the other day about there wasn't a photo of me on the trade union picket line. There's an album full of photos of me on trade union picket lines. The Tories have actually got the album. They use it at every opportunity. But we need to make sure we're quite a visible presence when we do go there. We need to be there as Labour and proud to be Labour. So, you know, I would appeal to the people that are here, that go to the People's Assembly meetings, and particularly if I get elected as chair, I will go and speak as chair, because I'm not going to allow the burden of all these meetings to fall on Peter, Kyle and on I'm more than happy to share that burden.
Okay, I'm just going to